And good day, folks. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Always happy to hear the Marine Corps anthem. Thank you to all those vets that served. You know, my freedoms and the fact that I can mouth off, be behind this microphone, it happens for a couple reasons. One is because vets give up some of their freedoms to protect my freedom. Two is we've got a Constitution and I have the right to do it. And I'm lucky enough to have people listening. So thank you to all the listeners. Thank you to those that are listening on social media also. Some of you, if you choose social media, you can watch. If you just listen while you're in your car, you know, if you're driving, you probably shouldn't be watching. I'm honored that a few thousand people listen to me each week. I'm going to start with a couple local Fresno area events. Chloe Cole. She's been at the forefront. She was convinced that she was actually a man and had her breasts cut off and was transed by the woke left industrial complex. And then she came to her senses. Well, she's going to be at representing Turning Point at Fresno State, April 29th at noon in the free speech zone. And she's going to have basically a debate with or a conversation with any student that comes up. They're anticipating a couple thousand people. Should be a fun time. So something like that interests you. This gal has a lot to say. She lived the trans experience and realized, no, just because they wanted to have her cut off her breast, and I think the operation you do down below is called addictomy. Fortunately, she didn't go all the way with that. She just had the top surgery. But she realized it didn't make her happier. It didn't change the fact that there's only two genders. So if you want to go and hear somebody that actually lived that, there's a great opportunity. Another one that's very California based. Grassroots California Action is coming to Clovis. Oh, I should have done these in the opposite order. April 27th from 12 to 3:30. You're going to need to go to the website, Grassroots California Action. I think it's a .com. Denise Aguilar of Freedom Angels is there. She's been at the forefront fighting for women's issues. Now, I don't mean like more abortion. I mean like, hey, maybe men shouldn't be competing in women's sports. Hey, we should maybe, I don't know, not hide things from parents. So she's fighting for parental rights, like AB 1955 does, that empowers schools here in California to hide gender issues. But really, it's kind of a broad language, so it means that schools now are obligated by state law. I'm sure this will go to the courts. I'm sure that there's already cases started. But it obligates school districts to hide things from parents by state law. Not okay. Denise is a hero and a friend. Hope you go see that event also. Now, getting to first 100 days of Trump, because I have listened to the lefties just go, the sky is falling, he's a fascist, it's the end of democracy as we know it, we're a republic. You know, everything Trump does is fascism, even though they're the ones that want state control. They're the ones that are using, I don't know, how about intimidation and violence? Hallmarks of fascists. Trump's going to ruin the economy. I think that's the person that's less political. They're going to hear Trump's going to ruin the economy, and they're like, well, wait a minute, what is he doing? They're a little worried. And that's reasonable if you don't pay a lot of attention to politics. And let's face it, most people after about if we got all the way up to the Third Amendment, they wouldn't even know what the Third Amendment was. By the way, it's about quartering soldiers. Hopefully will never be particularly relevant in the modern world. But at the time when they wrote the Third Amendment, England could have a bunch of soldiers show up at a small town and say, guess what? You have a new house guest, and you're going to take them until We say different. So they wrote the Third Amendment to stop regular citizens from being compelled. At that point, they weren't quite U.S. citizens. It hadn't quite all been formed when they came up with this idea. But they had declared independence. Well, they didn't like that idea. So most people can't even get to the Third Amendment. So just the idea that, wow, Trump's going to ruin the economy. Well, okay, the main way they're saying he's going to ruin the economy is if we look at what's happening with tariffs. And if you look at what's happening with tariffs, Trump is saying the same thing. You can find videos of Nancy Pelosi where frankly, she looks like she has skin rather than leather, Botoxed leather on her face. Meaning 30 years ago, back when she was in her, I would guess, mid-50s, because isn't she about 85? Saying the same things that Trump's saying about tariffs, that we have an unlevel playing field, that the world is taking advantage of us, that there's a trade deficit, that by allowing these unfair policies, in other words, a tariff is a fee that a country, let's say the United States, puts on the imports from another country. But here's the dirty little secret. Most of the tariffs, they happened around the world, and we have very few tariffs against the world. And Trump's just like, well, but I want to level the playing field. Since he's announced that plan, there's been more than 75 countries that have come to the Trump administration and said, we want to cut a deal. So I think this is going to be worked out. Now, two of the big standouts would be Canada. It is a major trade partner, but we make most of what we need. They need us more than we need them. I do think that Canada's going to have I'm sure that Canada's having an election in a few days. I think it's a little less than a week now. And I don't even think it matters whether it's a liberal candidate or Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party leader. I think a deal will be struck, but it's going to happen after the election. The big thing is that now a major trading partner of ours, the most populous country in the world, has agreed to a deal with us. That is India, and I think they have a prime minister. I don't think it's president. So Modi, their prime minister, has agreed to a deal. J.D. Vance went over there with his family. Probably didn't hurt that his wife, Usha, is Indian. Probably helped smooth things over, and they've cut a deal. Now, India regionally is the biggest rival of China. They share some border space. They fight over little border skirmishes all the time. They both have huge populations. Now, India's not perfect, but they are a democracy. They're not a republic like us, so they have some improving to do, but they are a democracy. Minorities do have some rights, as opposed to in China. That's the other one that's holding out, because Xi Jinping, he's got something to prove. He has to consolidate his power and can't be seen as weak. It doesn't even matter whether he's right or wrong on these issues. When it's a dictatorship, this is a dictatorship that you pronounce communism. So I know it's a weird pronunciation for dictatorship, but they're really the same thing. If the state controls everything, the state provides all freedoms. The state, regulates every aspect of your life. Did you know that there are millions upon millions of cameras in China? That there's a social credit score, so if you're not complying to everything the government wants, well, if they got digital currency, then when you go to the store and they know you're there, guess what? You get limited on what you can buy, what you can do. There is no freedom there. So if we're taking China down a peg, I'm okay with that. I get that it destabilizes things, but ultimately I do think that We will make a deal with China. But as we begin to make more and more deals with countries around the world, it begins to isolate China. As we have free access to other countries as far as our exporting things, that will make a huge difference. Looks like we're going to have a deal with Australia. Not a huge trading partner, but as far as a regional power, Australia makes a difference because it is one of the great. India and China would be the two things that are kind of blocks to China's power. Oh, I forgot Japan also. Japan is saying when Xi Jinping and South Korea, Chinese Communist government, they said, oh, well, we're in talks with South Korea and Japan. He basically was trying to drive a wedge between the United States and those two countries. And those two countries immediately came out and said, no, what you talking about? It's kind of like that 80s sitcom, What's Happening? Where that boy kept saying, what you talking about, Willis? So China's mostly running up against walls with everybody. Nobody really wants to support China because they've been a bully. Because if somebody in your country or a company in, let's say, the United States comes up with this great idea, China still regularly, normally, either knocks off that product if you make a unique product or steals the idea. They don't believe in international patents whatsoever. Well, that's kind of a problem. Trump's standing against that, and he's doing what the Democrats talked about doing for the last 30 years. It's just nobody had the strength to do it. Interestingly enough, Trump's poll numbers are going up because of that. Another really interesting one is El Salvador. And they've cut deals with us. Sure. You want people to go to prison? We'll save you some money for $6 million, which sounds like a ton of money. But if a prisoner's going to be there for years, $6 million for their life is a heck of a deal for us. And frankly, if somebody was a U.S. citizen and went through all of their judicial appeals, in other words, they got all their rights, they went through all the courts, and they're still found to be guilty and a total scumbag, this is usually for violent crimes, murder, rape, things like that. I don't have a problem with them going to a supermax prison in another country. No problem whatsoever. So El Salvador has decided, because they had this huge problem with the MS-13, and I'll connect this to the U.S. in a minute. That's where the gang was founded. That's where most MS-13 gang members are from. It had become this really kind of third world, super corrupt country. And they then elected a guy named Bukele. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I think I'm pretty close. And he said, I'm going to clean up the corruption. And he started imprisoning, created this special prison, and started putting every MS-13 member he could find in his country. He locked them all up. Called them terrorists, locked them all up. It's probably not how we go about it in the U.S. because the liberals would have their panties in a bunch and go, well, but he's really a nice person. It's only rape and incest and murder that he does, and he had a hard life, because they don't want consequences for actions. Now, interestingly enough, the Trump administration, with their border enforcement policy, with their pledge and Trump's pledge to get rid of anybody that's both a criminal and an illegal. They found somebody in Maryland. The guy has been through court multiple times. He has gang tattoos. He wears gang colors. He's been found by judges twice to be, at the very minimum, one of the cases he was found to be a gang-related person. The other one he was found to be absolutely a gang member, and he's not a U.S. citizen. So Trump went, okay. He put Tom Holman on it. Tom Holman got the guy. They sent him to El Salvador. So El Salvador went, well, let's see. Why? This guy's a citizen, and he's a gang member. We'll take him. And then the Democrats went, well, let's see. Who should I defend? Because I got to stand for democracy. You know, we got to stand for the little guy. Why? I should defend the criminal, wife beating. She had a restraining order against him. Illegal gang member criminal. And now we've had multiple legislative branch representatives from the Democratic Party go to El Salvador and try to get the guy out of prison. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. And the reason I say thank you is not because I think the guy should be out of prison, nor do I want him to come back. They keep talking about how he needs his day in court. If you are an illegal, in other words, you snuck in, you're not under our jurisdiction and our laws, not really. You don't get the guarantees that protect your freedom in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. If you're here with a green card, yes, you do get some of those rights, as long as you're an adult. But if you're here illegally, what do you mean he needs his day in court? No. And I want to thank the Democrats. I hope they keep doing things like this because it keeps shining a light on their insanity. They don't care about doing the right thing. They don't care whether or not we're serving the interest of U.S. citizens. They care about money and power. So Trump closes the border. I think he gets exceedingly high marks on how he has closed the border. It's not perfect. But I just saw an interesting article where one place on the border, a northern border, so Canada, if we compared the worst day of border crossings from Biden to that day where they didn't have anybody, 99.9% decrease in border crossings that day. Now, it's not near that high on the southern border. It's only in the mid-90s. But we have actually shut the border. I talked to a friend last night that knows somebody that's been here for 30 years. Shame on the guy for never applying for his green card, never trying to become a U.S. citizen, though sounded like a nice guy. But he made decent money, lived here in California. He self-deported because he was afraid that if he didn't, that if they caught him, one of the things the Trump administration is doing is if you're caught here illegally, you're not supposed to come back. So he self-deported back to Mexico. Now, part of me kind of feels for the guy, but part of me is like, you had 30 years to deal with this problem. I know it's expensive, but you had 30 years to deal with it, and you chose not to. And it's not like he was super poor. He made a reasonably decent living. It wasn't like he was a farm worker making minimum wage. He was doing much better than that. So I was a little saddened by that one. So it's also interesting that the Democrats are so, well, entitled to government money because government money grows on trees. There doesn't seem to actually be a connection in their mind between the taxes that come in and government money. They wanted the U.S. government to pay for their trips to El Salvador, to release the gang member. Again, I actually don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's good that they were denied. It's not a bad thing that they're searching for it. Essentially, Trump has been so effective, he has left the Democratic Party kind of rudderless. If we were to look at some polls, these are national polls. One was CBS, one was ABC, and one was Gallup. The CBS and the ABC they've been doing for like 30 years. The Democrats were at 27% approval in one and 29% in the other. That's the lowest in the history of both of those polls. because they're rudderless and they keep picking loser issues like, well, we're all for men and women's sports. But about 70% of the U.S. population, high 70s, is against men, or we should say pretend men, in women's sports. You know, trans men. Now, what's even worse is Gallup has been taking this poll, and Gallup has them at 25%. That's down 9 points from the previous low the Democrats have ever been at in the history of that Gallup poll that asks, do you approve of Democrats, or what is their level of approval? So we have no idea who's leading them. We have some fun stuff we'll get to later on that. How are we doing on time? We're going to go ahead and take our first break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Again, thank you to everybody that's listening. I would really be thankful if you were to share this video when you come across it. If you think this is useful information and you know a friend that might need to hear this. Not always necessarily another conservative. What if there's a family member and you can just kind of poke them a little bit? Do it with a spirit of fun. And I'm happy to help poke them. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. We're talking about the first 100 days of Trump. Interestingly enough, I think that Trump has opened up an opportunity in California. Not just in California, but I live in California, so I'm biased. I would like our state to be fixed more than any other state. Frankly, we're a fifth of the U.S. economy, so if we had some sanity here, that sanity would emanate out across the country, across this great place of freedom that the left loves to complain about how we're a horrible country, but never seems to leave. And I know that I'm not a great fundraiser, but I think that if they were actually willing to leave, I have lots of friends that would chip in, and we'd be happy. If you think this is the worst country ever, we'd be happy to chip in and help you leave. The problem is the left never seems to take us up on it. You know, as close as we got was when Bernie decided he needed his honeymoon in Hollywood. No, not in Hollywood. Why, it was in Moscow. You know, that communist country. And he's been screaming about the oligarchy for 25 years or so. He's currently on an oligarchy tour. Well, a whole bunch of that time, Democrats were in control. And he used to complain about millionaires. But for some reason, when he got his third mansion and became a millionaire, he decided millionaires are okay and we don't talk about millionaires. It's only the billionaires that are bad. So getting back to that idea, I think Trump's made something a lot more possible in California. And that is, half of Californians now say they'd vote for a Republican governor. Slightly less than half, but the fact that we're close and we've been getting our clocks cleaned for 20 years at the state level in California, half are saying, yeah, I'd consider a Republican. That means we only have to have better turnout. We don't even need any more bodies, just better turnout. Nearly 70% just voted to make crime illegal again here in California through a ballot initiative. Since Lord Newsom, long may he reign, was voted in, more than 1 million new Republicans have been registered. That's kind of an interesting stat. California is shifting. That shift, I think, is allowing us to have a real shot at a governor. Now, I don't know who that candidate's going to be at this point. Later today, There's a small event I'm going to where I'll get to meet Steve Hilton. Now, I've met him before, but it's a little more intimate setting. I'm hoping I get to ask some questions. I did an informal poll on Facebook, not scientific, with a very conservative group. So this is where the hardcore conservatives are kind of thinking. And I put up 4 names for governor in that poll. Leo Zaki, who I like him personally. Not sure he's right for the job, but Leo's fun. Leo's likable. Really personable. Daniel Mercury, not as likable, hardcore conservative, constitutionalist, smart guy, not near as likable as Leo. Not a huge following. Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff, and Steve Hilton. Well, sadly, Leo came in last. He got 2 votes. Steve Hilton came in third with like 14 votes. This poll's still running, so it could have shifted a little bit. Chad Bianco got like 19 votes. And Daniel Mercury got 43. Now, this is with the hardcore conservatives. Now, I love the fact that hardcore conservatives are willing to stand for values. But the truth is, Trump's not a hardcore conservative. He's a common sense populist conservative. They're not the same thing. So if Daniel can catch fire, would I be interested in that? Yeah, but he doesn't have a huge social media following. There's not a lot of people that donate to him. Doesn't mean I think he's a bad guy. I've interviewed him twice. I even was responsible for bringing him to town in the last governor's election. I think he's a good guy. But he's going to have to catch fire. He's going to have donations because grassroots by itself is not enough to do it. So for me, of those 4, it's interesting that's how that worked out. 2 of them, they have enough name recognition and enough money donors. And sadly, politics, as you get farther up, it becomes more and more about money. You at least need a minimum amount. You can have an outstanding personality and campaign hard and overcome some of it, but you can't have no money or limited money. You have to have a fairly abundant amount. For instance, Trump was outspent 2-1 by the brilliant Kamala Harris. Yet he won every swing state, but he was outspent 2-1. But he still had a huge war chest. He has a dynamic personality. Whether you like it or not, Trump evokes a response. I don't know who's going to win, but it was interesting to see that we have, fortunately, only 2 major candidates. You know, there's probably another dozen Republican candidates that say they're running. Not all of them have actually done their paperwork and declared, but there's about a dozen. I see this as Leo Zaki and Daniel Mercury as kind of outside. They're going to have to catch magic. They're going to have to catch lightning in a bottle and ride that. Or if they don't, and it needs to happen soon, I think they should get out. As opposed to the other 2, they've already got a following. They've already got big name recognition. They're all 4 of them are well spoken. Anyway, I'll be very curious to what happens. And I thought it was just kind of interesting that in the right place, conservatives, we very much want something, but too many conservatives have either given up, in other words, they don't vote, or they've given up in another way and they've moved out of state. So many of the productive citizens of the United States, or of former citizens, I shouldn't say citizens, residents of California, because you're not a citizen of our communist state. You're a citizen still of the United States, thank goodness. If they hadn't moved away, California would have a better shot. The good news, though, is they did tend to move to conservative places, and those became conservative strongholds. But I still think we can flip this state. We've got a little bit of Fox News' opinion on what's going on with Trump's first 100 days. So we're just going to play a minute of that.
Fox News polls reveal what America thinks of President Trump's first 100 days.
Lauren Simetti from our sister network Fox Business is here with a look at those numbers. Hey, Lauren.
Good morning. Okay, so this is the report card for how the president has done thus far. Look, really strong numbers when it comes to the border. He's at 55% approval. Does well on foreign policy, too. Look at the border crossings at the southwest border. In March, they were down 95% from a year ago. And Americans largely approve of, how he's getting bad people out of this country, despite what's happening in the courts. But when it comes to the economy, this is where it's a little trickier, and this is where his numbers have gone south. He's struggling on the economy overall with a 38% approval rating. On tariffs, it's even lower at 33%, and his handling of inflation also at 33%. Many Americans believe that the tariffs are inflationary or will be inflationary. That's the worry.
Okay, so I think the reason why there's so much worry with the tariffs, with inflation, with the economy, is because the stock market, when Trump announced his tariff plan, a lot of people lost position. The stock market went down. That's expected. I don't believe it's going to be that way long term. If we get a better deal, in other words, we actually have something closer to free trade, it will be easier for the average worker to make a better wage. Look, if we seal the border, there's less competition for jobs, meaning employers are going to have to pay a little more. If we bring manufacturing back, you used to be able to have a manufacturing job and only one person worked in the family, usually the guy. And the woman stayed home. Now, I'm not saying she has to stay home, but they could make it on one income. And in today's world, you almost can't. That's a big deal. And a large part of that is because we've allowed trade deals that favored foreign countries. For instance, China has most favored nation status. I'm not sure it does now that Trump's back in, but it did during Biden. I have not actually looked this one up. That most favored nation status allows for cheaper shipping. It's like you get that when you're a poor country, not necessarily a country that we love the most, but it's an advantage that through shipping rates we give to countries. And somehow China's maintained that. And they're the number 2 economy in the world, still much smaller than us. One of the other things that gives me a lot of hope is in the last year, the number of transactions that are happening via the dollar have gone dramatically up, and particularly in the last 3 months or 100 days. You remember towards the end of Biden, they kept talking about how it's the end of the dollar, and the BRICS, which stands for, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The BRICS dollar, they created their own currency, and they were using it to try to essentially take over the world in a lot of ways. Well, since Trump, confidence around the world is back in the dollar. Now, if Trump was destroying everything and all of our competitors, all those competing countries, the approximately 200 countries, I think it's closer to 250 around the world, if Trump was destroying everything, wouldn't they be running from the dollar? But keep in mind, a lot of times what the mainstream media tells you, including the Wall Street Journal, they very much have a bias, and I don't totally trust them. And I think that's fair to not totally trust them. For instance, why would I not trust them? Well, let's see. Just a little while ago, they told me every government lie that Fauci told about COVID. And I was supposed to buy every bit of it. And then they set up the fear porn. Hope that doesn't get us in trouble with YouTube using that weird word, where there was a death count every day. Except the magical part about that death count is suddenly, for the first time since the CDC has been keeping track, we had 0 deaths from the flu. Because every one of those got attributed to COVID. So what's the real numbers? We don't know. Not completely. Another thing that I believe that Trump gets huge marks for is the people that he's chosen. They brought light, whether it's Doge, bringing light to corruption, or just things that are wrong. It might not actually technically be corrupt, but should we be funding the equivalent of Sesame Street in Iran? You know, a program like Sesame Street? Should we be funding transgender surgeries in places around the world? No. No, not at all. There's a rather fun poll that talked about which Democrat was in the lead. Who did they think was in charge of the Democratic Party? And to me, this one is just hilarious. Now, it's not surprising that their most recent nominee, Kamala Harris, is at the top, but she's only at 17%. Let's think about that. 17% believe that Kamala Harris is the leader of the Democratic Party, the clear leader. Chuck Schumer, he's at 15%. Barack Obama. I'm actually surprised that Barack is not a little higher, because didn't he just have his 3rd presidency with Joe Biden? You know, that's why he maintained a mansion in D.C. But what gets even more interesting is down in 4th place, we have no one at 11%. Isn't that crazy? No one. Oh, is it 5th place? Okay. That's my eyesight, folks. Luckily, you can't tell that. Voice for radio and bad eyes, too. Well, face for radio. Voice for radio, that's a little questionable. But I'm happy for you're still listening. Bernie Sanders is down at 9%, so he's below no one. AOC is below that at 6%. Nancy Pelosi's at 3%. Tim Walz is at 2%. And the news that warms my heart, because I have a special place in my heart for Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is less thought of as a clear leader for the Democratic Party in the biggest, most populous state than Tim Walz. You know, Tampon Tim. Matter of fact, don't know beats Gavin Newsom. No one beats Gavin Newsom. That's pretty good news. And kind of hilarious that tied for 5th, no one is in charge of the Democratic Party. That's Trump's fault. He keeps hitting them on all these different levels, and they're screaming like wet cats. But he's mostly winning. His energy policies being enacted. His border policies being enacted. His tariff policy is starting to come together again. We've had our first agreement with India, which is a major trading partner. And with it now being the most populous country, slightly bigger than China as far as population, here's all this potential. And a lot of the Indian people, they're very educated. Matter of fact, you ever have to call tech support and you wonder why they have an accent that is very, very good? That is because they are Indian. And so much of our tech support is outsourced. I have a family member that has both U.S. teams and Indian teams, and he's a software designer. And he's like, all of them are good. And strangely enough, India seems to be able to educate people without convincing them that capitalism is bad, that we should be indoctrinated, into socialism, communism, worship of government, worship of trans. What rights have people lost since Trump has become president this second term? I mean, I know of an El Salvadoran who was here illegally, who got shipped out, as I think is appropriate for everybody, that especially if they're criminals, they should be shipped out. I don't think there even needs to be a hearing. And there are judges that are like local judges that seem to think that they have more power over what happens with immigration than our president. Well, our president in the Constitution, in what is that, Article 2, has enumerated powers, and one of them is regulating the border. So I don't know how a judge got his head so big and thought he was so important, or it's maybe that he doesn't think he's that big and important. It's that the Democrats care about power and money, and anything they can do to oppose Trump is worthwhile. For instance, they used to have Trump's tariff policy, and now magically they don't. Or Trump has deported a little more than 100,000 people so far in this first 100 days. Barack Obama, he was there for 8 years. He deported 5.4 million people, something like that. Bush, who was there, Bush Jr., he deported somewhere around 10 million people, that were here illegally. Clinton, he deported somewhere around 13 million people. And Trump, deporting, pretty much focusing on criminals. He's deported a little more than 100,000, but now they've decided, oh no, we have to deport people. Well, that's wrong. Why? But we need to look at those people's rights. Well, when other presidents were doing it, it was okay. It's because the left only cares about power, and they realize that Trump is rewriting the narrative. We're going to go to our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I'm going to do my best to be positive. It's been a hard week for me, folks. Pray for me. Let's go ahead and come back. And this is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So why would I be positive in this? Here I'm in a state of largely tyranny. Parents don't have full rights here in California. We have a cheat by mail system. Our governor takes no accountability for anything. Both our governor and the mayor of LA said, we're going to get rid of all of the obstacles that will stop you from rebuilding. We're going to make it easy for you to rebuild after going through those catastrophic fires. And last I heard, my information's about a week old now, because I haven't looked into this for about a week. But a week ago, 4 pieces of property had got their permits. 4. Those fires ended a couple of months ago. So why would he be hopeful in all that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. More Republicans are registered. There's an enthusiasm for Republicans, and people are beginning to go, well, okay, what we're doing is insane, and maybe we shouldn't keep repeating the insanity. So people are waking up. That's a big deal. Another one that gives me a lot of hope. Almost 70%, I think it was 68%, voted to make crime a crime again. In California, up till November, I think the law then went into place in January. But in November, we had a ballot initiative that made crime again. It used to be that a criminal could go into any store, steal 900 and we're going to call it 950. It was a little less than 1,000 And all it was a misdemeanor ticket. So cops weren't bothering to show up. Now, that criminal, if he was really motivated, could steal 15 times a day, 20 times a day. They weren't cumulative. They didn't become felonies. Each one was a ticket. And since they weren't bothering to send out the police, and if it was a major corporation, the corporation whined a lot, but their solution was, well, don't touch them, let them go, and we'll just charge everybody else more money. Well, California got rid of that nonsense and made, it wasn't a perfect fix, but we made crime again. Another thing that I am tremendously hopeful here in California about is that the Trump administration says, what do you mean illegals are on Medi-Cal? No, we're not doing that. We're taking care of that problem. You know, they haven't fully taken care of that problem yet, but it's coming. How is it that somebody here illegally gets to be on welfare? That's a form of welfare because they're not paying into the system. It's not like they've been here all their lives and they're paying into the system. There's probably some exceptions to that. But why is it that we're obligated to pay for somebody else? I don't think we are. I think if you're on welfare and you're here illegally, you need to go. No more complicated than that. And then one of the things that leads me the most hopeful is we have another ballot initiative that is polling incredibly high. One is a citizenship proof of citizenship before you're able to register to vote. That's a big deal. Proof of citizenship. That is about 78, almost 80% of people agree. And it doesn't matter if you're on the right, the left. Remember, you need to tell all of your liberal friends. Trump cheated. He tried to cheat in the election in 2020. And we need voter ID. You need to convince your liberal friends. We need voter ID because Trump cheated. It's fun to do. Now, I don't think Trump cheated. I think there was cheating on the other side. Nonetheless, if you can convince a liberal that they need voter ID and they're willing to support it, go ahead and sucker them in. Next thing to this ballot initiative is voter ID. For me, that's a game changer. So many people I know that I meet in my business, that I run into, that I just talk to, they're not necessarily the most political. They're not real motivated to vote because they're like, well, my vote doesn't count. Because in California, we got 30 days to vote and then 30 days to count. Another way to think of that is 30 days to vote and then 30 days to figure out how to cheat the votes so that you get the results you want. Californians, did you ever notice at anything at the state level or above, if it's close, Republicans almost without exception lose because they always magically find more ballots? Well, this takes care of part of that problem because it's one less way that they can cheat. This does not fix the whole problem, but I do believe this ballot initiative will pass. For my California friends, if you go to Carl DeMaio, Reform California, he is essentially the assemblyman from San Diego that has launched this initiative. And you can get all the information you need. If you sign up for the online petition, that will give him his information about you. Then when the ballot is actually ready to hit and get signatures, because it's going to have to go through a signature process before it can get on the ballot, and they need 1.2 million, something like that, signatures to get it on the ballot. They will immediately, as soon as the paper version, the one that counts, comes out, they'll already have your information, be able to send it to you. You can then sign the paper ballot, and it has a couple extra places for extra signatures, so if you know other voters. And you know, most people in California are registered, but our voting numbers are pitiful. But so are the Democrats. What if Republicans showed up on an off-year election 10% higher, 10% more decided to come vote, like during this governor race. That would change the whole equation. All you have to do is find those people and get one. You're only responsible, how about for one? Get one more to the polls to make that difference, because I do believe we can win this governor race. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town.